Yo, what's up? It's Chris. Chris, how you feeling? Let's see if I can get better lighting in here. Get some quality there. But you are tuning in to one of my first lives ever. So I want to say thank you for participating. Shout out to Real Men Teach, homie Kurt, Morehouse brother. And my name is Chris Carr. I rap, I take photos, make videos. Melissa and I co-founded Black Land Ownership, Gone Before Us, have my hands on a lot of different baskets. Also work with young people. And one of the things we discuss is the relevance of history when faced with contemporary questions. And how do we problem solve that? How do we really try to reconcile oppositional elements? And I don't mean oppositional in that they can't be resolved, but just perspectives or experiences that are in conflict, that are incongruous. And sometimes alignment can push things forward. And sometimes the fact that these things aren't in alignment causes change and catalyzes activity. So recently, there have been a number of Black folks in the media that have had conversations or have made statements that have led to controversy. And at the root of it, I don't want to get into the specifics of who they are or what they said, but at the root of it is a question that I'm starting to have, which is a kind of re-emergence of Black conservatism. And before we get into what that means, I want to get into this idea of what do we mean when we say conservative, liberal, radical? And how do we approach different spheres of society with that lens? So before we get to that, let's talk about, I think it was Thomas Kuhn, and he had a book about science, but where he talked about paradigm shifts. An idea of a paradigm being your lens by which you view society. And at certain points, the paradigm was creationism. And so people viewed society through that lens. So when they discovered certain things, they weren't able to believe it because it contradicted their paradigm. And it's not just a bias, it's like an actual, like, total view or veil by which you see the world. Now we're in a space where science has become the dominant paradigm, and scientific method, and this idea of experimentation and conclusions and inductive and deductive reasoning. That's a contemporary paradigm when it comes to approaching scientific knowledge or understanding the world around us. When we think about socially and culturally, we have a system now where we have centralized government, centralized banking, humans stay in the same place. Now with the internet, we're traveling and distant work, but theoretically we're domesticated, right? Like, we're not nomads in the way that we were. And when you have the administrative and bureaucratic development around that in a society like ours, it needs to be managed. And one of the ways we manage that is our political system. And so in our approach to our political system, it's going to be the receptacle, or kind of like the hub for how we view economics, education, policing, healthcare. All these other parts of our real lives get funneled into our political apparatus, and we try to then advocate for ourselves via that. So when we're thinking about, like, politics, midterm elections just happened. Presidential election will be coming up, and Donald Trump's back in the race. A person can be like, well, why would Donald Trump run again? How did he win in the first place? Well, was it that he brought out the worst in America, or he became the voice box for what had been present in conservative white male America? When you think about Barack Obama, did he have so much popularity because he fit a certain trope of liberal Black America as well as radical and liberal white America? What does that look like? What does that mean? So let's think about our political history. And I'm not going to go all the way back to when America started, or Revolutionary War, or the beginning of the country. But there were multiple parties, right? Bull Moose Party, Masonic Party, Anti-Masonic Party, all these other parties. But by the 50s or 60s, we're kind of cutting it down to the two, Republican and Democrat. And then there were some offshoots or what have you. Well, if you look at it, the country was still heavily weighted to rural America up into the 50s or 60s. Like, a lot of people had moved to cities, urbanization had taken place, but it wasn't really until the development of our highway systems and the interconnected ability to have suburbs and the sprawl of cities, to where you really have a lot of people move to urban areas that aren't involved in just industry or working in factories or commerce or things where you need close proximity, like port cities and shipping, where you have to congregate there. And so, like, when you have civil rights movement, nobody liked Black people. All right. So, like, in the 40s and 50s, none of the parties were cool with Black people. At different times, some supported different legislation or did things to stifle Blackness more or less. But neither the Democrats nor Republicans like Black people. All right. So then the 60s hit, and there's a fracturing. I mean, you have Vietnam War, you have the economic scenario, you have changes socially with the introduction of like LSD, drugs, hippie movement, all these things. And there's kind of a social fracturing. And during that time period, the parties had to figure out what was going to be the social theme or their big issue. Will it be the economy? Will it be the war? Will it be civil rights? Will it be? And they started picking and choosing which voters they were going to go for based on these kind of themes or topics. And as you can see, at a certain point, some of the Republicans are like, we're going to stick with the segregationists. And the Democrats are like, well, if we do the math around the country, is it possible that there are more people we can reach that are anti-segregation and still pro-white folks? And we can kind of run the thing of like, we don't really help the Black folks, but we're not the bad white people. And can we say we're a bit more open to social programs and a bit less interested in heavy policing and a bit more on the lines of anti-war? And you start seeing this delineation, right, of how authority is viewed, how power should be exhibited in society. And the parties started kind of falling into these lines of, okay, the Democrats will not be quite so much pro-war as Republicans. Republicans are going to go with the conservative Christians and the evangelicals by like the 80s. The Democrats say, well, we'll support civil rights. The Republicans say, we won't. We'll support people who are using fire hoses on Black folks. And so once the parties do that, you kind of get this idea of, well, then conservatives traditionally hold on to tradition. What's the tradition at that point? Most Americans were monotheistic and Christian. Okay, so within the political and social sphere, conservative religiously means you do what people used to do, and that's like be a conservative Christian in a certain way. So abortion, bad. Sex, bad. But you care about society, but don't necessarily need the government to take care of it because your church will take care of it, right? If you're a Democrat, you might then say liberal religious freedom, right? Sexual freedom and openness. You may say the power should not be held by the state and that the people should have the power, whether it's unions or workers' rights or maybe correcting the history of sexism and racism. So you see the Democrats fall into that line. When we think about economics, laissez-faire, hands-off, unfettered capitalism was adopted by the Republicans, which then leads into trickle-down economics, a whole lot of like pro-business initiatives. Democrats say, well, unions are good. Having a floor on or like a minimum wage is good. Ensuring that there is corporate oversight and making sure that the banks and the economic system here have a check and balance and that it's not totally hands off. That we should have subsidies. And the Democrats, we say we should spend tax dollars on things important to society. Republicans say no. So again, taxes become another issue. So you see how like these issues of liberal and conservative start getting broken down by political party instead of what people really think, right? So that now when we think about taxes, do I want to pay as much as I do in taxes? No. But do I think kids should have a social program? Yes. So maybe I would say take the money away from the military, right? But who's going to agree with that? Both Republican and Democrats are pro-military. All right. So it's not necessarily about what people think, but we're talking about political party. So then when you think about like Black folks, like where do Black folks fall in and where do radical people fall in? So like radical white folks may have been like trying to take over college campuses and like blow up buildings. Radical black folks may have been taking over college campuses and blowing up buildings. So in the radical sphere, there may actually be an overlap. But when you look at the other spheres, that partition based on the 60s and 70s doesn't really align necessarily with black folks. So that like when you think of conservatism, black folks historically have been conservative, but we didn't like the party that was racist. So if the Republicans had actually been pro-black, it would have been a wrap. Like it would have been all over. All the black people would have loved it in the sense that like we go to church, we believe in God. Now again, that's changing. Like it's 2022, but up until what the past 10, 15 years, black folks were like conservative, except in the areas of social policy, civil rights, and equity. In that way, we were radical sometimes and oftentimes liberal. Um, and so when you think about like education, a lot of black folks believe that you have to educate yourself, that you learn from your family, that sometimes your teachers don't know what the hell they're talking about, that they have some programming or agenda they're doing, right? When you look at religion, black folks go to church, believe in God. When you look at sex, again, until recently, we didn't have our sexual revolution. Like in the 60s, you don't see a whole lot of black folks at those like sex party outdoor hippie camps. We're now starting to understand what modern day ethical non-monogamy looks like in a public discussion. Like as people, of course, we African, we understand what's been happening. But in terms of in America as like a social discussion, when have you been able to show up as a black person like, hey, this is my girlfriend and this is my boyfriend? And everyone's like, oh, cool. You know, like black folks historically have been a bit more aligned with the heteronormativity of America. Like if I'm talking about like in the past 100 years. And so like, how did black people approach queerness? Even now, how do black people deal with queerness and transness? Usually a bit more conservative, right? Definitely some elements are radical, some elements are very welcoming and liberal. Like my family has always said, like, love who you love. But I also know in the area where I grew up, there are people who don't hang out with me now because they're like, yeah, I think Chris is on that gay shit. And so then when you start adding this all together, you get this cultural confusion, and you're going to end up with black people saying abortion shouldn't be legal. Well, why? They're church people. That's why. But they're not Republican, because Republicans where they live in Mississippi want some Ku Klux Klan shit, right? When you see a person like Kanye getting up there and saying certain wild shit, he's coming from a very conservative perspective of maleness and patriarchy that's tied to religion, right? When you hear some of the discussions around economics and business principles now from different media sites where they're encouraging black people to get wealthy, it's similar thing to this kind of Protestant work ethic and an idea that via predestination, if you have committed yourself to God and you work hard, you should be rewarded in this life with financial rewards. And so make money, black man. You know, you see that out there, which is a somewhat conservative point of view. You see some of the folks up now, like a dude like Charleston White, that's like, yo, there's no man in the house. That's what's wrong with black men. That's a conservative point of view. You're seeing like how many, like now amongst the youth, you have black folks who are like, yeah, fuck the police. You have youth that are saying like, we're anti-authoritarian. But when you look at people my age, like 40 years and up, ask them how they felt when people said defund or totally abolish the police. A lot of black folks are like, we need the police. A lot of black folks are like, send these fucking gang members to jail, right? And so we have to consider, what does that mean moving forward? What does that mean for like women's rights, queer folks' rights, queer women's rights, trans queer women's rights? You know, what does that mean for as black men representation in certain ways and in media if there is no real space for how we really are? If it's you're supposed to say this or this, all this, which might be real, we don't understand that yet. So we don't have a place for it. What are we going to do politically? Are you going to keep voting for evil? When people say, well, I have to vote for the lesser evil, is that true? Can we force our politicians to actually represent our needs, our interests, our wants? If we continue to vote for people that don't support us, do they ever have to change? Is it better to vote for people that can't win, but show that individual, group, or community that they're supported? Or is it better to vote for somebody that would do 2 of the 12 things we need? You know, but I think it's something to start considering. Like, where do we fall? Why do the Democrats think we'll always vote for them as Black folks? Why are people surprised when Black folks are anti-abortion? You know, how are we going to manage the disparity and like the chasm between older Black folks and younger Black folks and the lack of intergenerational communication? How are we going to navigate the youth are able to use technology and be autonomous in a way that's in direct opposition to how older Black folks were? Older Black folks are like, yo, family is family. Like, you respect adults. You like cater to adults. And young people are like, I don't give a fuck what you're talking about. You don't like us. Why should we listen to you? And so we got a lot to work on. But I wanted to just start with this idea of what is Black conservatism? What would Black radicalism look like? Is it really burn the whole shit down? Is it go back to Africa? Is it no white person should have a job right now? Like, what does it look like? What is Black liberalism? Incrementalism, slowly using the political structure to make incremental changes. Conservative, like, yo, the system works the way it is. We just need to freak it. We need to learn the tools, and then we can break the matrix. I don't know. So thank you for participating in my first live. This has been exhilarating, and I can't wait to see your comments. If you can, it's no pressure. You already did the thing by being here. But if you can, like, subscribe, send me notes, share it, tell the homies. And I'm going to be coming to a city near you, and I'm going to bring the podcast set up. And so if you are interested in being featured on any of my discussions, lectures, interviews, let me know. I'm easily accessible. Again, my name is Chris Carr. You can check me out at chrisbankscarr.com. That's where you can find out about my art, my writings, my books, the shows we do. And yeah, see you soon. Peace.